I come here today both to congratulate you, but also to remind you of your extraordinary good fortune. This opportunity you have right now to serve and potentially even save this country in its hour of need. You see and you are well aware of what is happening to, within, and even coming out from this country right now. The incitement to political violence, the abnegation of hard-won alliances, turning our back on human suffering and human rights at home and around the world, the attacks on universities, on students, especially international students, exercising their First Amendment constitutionally protected rights, attacks on law firms who have the audacity to challenge this administration. The rollback of the right to vote and other foundational freedoms here in America, and perhaps most alarmingly to you, the undermining of the rule of law and the U.S. Constitution. Given your education, everything that you have learned here over the last 3 years, I think you understand the implications of all of this better than most. This is a real, and I believe clarifying moment of truth for America. And within this moment, we're going to be asking ourselves as Americans some very important basic questions like, will we submit to the powerful and the strong, or will we continue to be ruled by the law? Will we honor the foundational premise of this country, that we're all created equal, and the promise that flows from that we will all be treated equally under the law? Will this great democracy, the exception in the history of the world, and really still the exception on much of the planet today, will it persist or will it perish? Will we still be a government of, by, and for the people? I believe that as both students and now practitioners of the law, within your hands is the power to answer each and every one of these questions, not just for yourselves, not just for your generation, but for all of the generations to come. Now, you can be forgiven for wondering whether that's really true. When you think about what is in your hands, and you look at the concentration of political power in the hands of the president, for example, or economic power in the hands of the oligarchs, or even cultural power in the hands of the billionaire masters of algorithms and influence, what is in your hands that compares to what is in theirs? Or maybe put another way, is there any hope that people such as you, such as all of us, outside of the traditional centers of power, will be able to save this country? I would argue it is the only hope we have of saving this country. It's the only way this country has ever been saved in the past. And I further believe that we are going to overcome these challenges because we've overcome them before against even greater odds, and always through the power of people. To illustrate this, I'm going to draw you to my hometown of El Paso, Texas. More than a century ago, to this guy that you may or may not have heard of. His name is Lawrence Aaron Nixon. Really kind of an amazing guy who moves to El Paso at the turn of the last century and becomes as publicly and politically involved in El Paso as anyone. He helps to write the bond issues for the El Paso charter elections. He never misses a chance to vote or to participate in an election. He founds the first chapter of the NAACP anywhere in the state of Texas, and he does it in El Paso in 1915. He is as civically engaged as a man, especially a black man, could possibly be in the Jim Crow South of Texas in the 19-teens and the 1920s. So imagine what it felt like to him when the Texas State Legislature in 1923 passed what is known as the white primary law, which banned voting by Dr. Lawrence Nixon and every other African American in the state. And unlike other states of the former Confederacy, Texas did not do this euphemistically. They didn't ask you when you wanted to register to vote if you were black to tell us how many jelly beans are in the jar, or to recite this part of the Alabama state constitution, or to pass a literacy test. No, in Texas, in black and white, it said, if you are black, you will no longer be able to vote. Nonetheless, or maybe because of this, the next year, 1924, Nixon pays his poll tax, a requirement at the time for anybody to be able to vote. Goes to fire station number 5, his typical polling place on election day, and waits in line to vote. Imagine how he must have felt and what he must have looked like to everybody else there who was getting ready to cast their ballot. When he gets to the front of the line, he produces his poll tax receipt, lays it down on the counter, and the election judge and the poll worker, both of whom recognize Nixon on sight because the guy's never missed an election before, they say to him, "Dr. Nixon, you know we can't let you vote." And Nixon responds, "I know you can't, but I've got to try." He takes his case to the local district court, loses it immediately, appeals it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And in 1927, and you perhaps have studied this, he wins this signal voting rights victory before the highest court in the land, Nixon versus Herndon. He is now able to vote, only to have the Texas legislature convene an emergency session, rewrite the election code to circumvent this recent Supreme Court hearing, and once again disenfranchise Nixon and hundreds of thousands of other Texans. The next year, Nixon pays his poll tax, goes to fire station number 5, waits in line, is turned back, takes his case to the local federal district court, loses it, appeals it to the Supreme Court, and in 1932 wins a second Supreme Court victory. 2 victories. What am I doing with my life, right? You may have studied this one as well, Nixon versus Condon. Once again, he is now legally able to vote, but once again, the legislature convenes, rewrites the election code, circumvents the ruling, and he's disenfranchised. But this guy, Lawrence Nixon, never gave in, and he never gave up. He kept paying that poll tax, he kept waiting in line, he kept getting turned back, and it was a lonely journey. The radio station in El Paso took to calling him on election day, putting him on air for their listeners. "Dr. Nixon, are you going to vote today?" And he'd always respond, "I'm going to try." But that example, a man having the courage of his convictions, was not lost on his fellow Texans. Another young black physician, this time in Houston, Texas, Lonnie Smith, working with a 32-year-old Thurgood Marshall, takes a case to the Supreme Court, again, building on Nixon's arguments and that precedent. And in 1944, the court decides Smith versus Allwright, finally integrating once and for all elections in Texas. 20 years of patience and persistence and courage and hard work, and these people stayed after it. Election day in 44, Nixon goes into fire station number 5, waits in line, produces his poll tax receipt, and this time he voted. But the story and its impact don't end there. In that same town of El Paso, Texas, 10 years later, Thelma White will graduate valedictorian of the all-black Frederick Douglass High School in El Paso, Texas. She will attempt to enroll at Texas Western College, now known as the University of Texas at El Paso, and will be turned back solely based on the color of her skin. Following Nixon's example, she takes her case to the federal bench, but she wins, and she doesn't just win admission for herself, she wins the desegregation of every public institution of higher learning in the state of Texas. The story doesn't end there. 3 years later, in that same town, Raymond Tejas will be elected the first Mexican-American mayor of a major American city. And then 5 years after that, his city council colleagues will pass the first ordinance to desegregate places of public accommodation anywhere in the former Confederacy, a fact not lost on then President Kennedy, nor his successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the first president from the state of Texas, who uses all of the political capital at his disposal once he enters the highest position of public trust in the land, to pass and then sign civil rights, ending 90 years of Jim Crow segregation in the United States of America. On the heels of that victory, there's this meeting that you may have heard of that takes place in the Oval Office. It is with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Young, and President Johnson. And King and Young say to the president, "We owe you an eternal debt of gratitude for civil rights. But with all due respect, Mr. President, now we would like to vote." And the president says, "Gentlemen, you're right. I'd love to help, but I just don't have the power to get voting rights done in America. I used it all on civil rights." As they leave, a dejected Young turns to King and he asks, "What do we do now?" And King says, "We go out there and we get this guy some power." Over the coming days and weeks and months, everyday Americans, just like you, just like all of us, we took to the State House steps. We burned up the switchboard at the Capitol. We wrote to the president. We marched. We protested. We did everything we could think of to try to break through. Until on the 7th of March, 1965, one of us actually did. A 24-year-old John Lewis, leading 600 other marchers, attempts to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And for his having the courage of his convictions, he's beaten within an inch of his life. But so shocking to the conscience of America, so galvanizing is that heroic step that he took, that within 8 days, Johnson's able to convene a joint session of Congress. Johnson finally had the power that had been missing, and it didn't come from money, it didn't come from title, it didn't come from political office, it came from the people. And in that speech that he gave, this voting rights speech on the 15th of March, 1965, he placed Lewis and all the other civil rights and voting rights leaders in the pantheon of great Americans who have made us who we are. As it was at Lexington and Concord, he began. As it was 100 years ago at that courthouse in Appomattox, he could have added, as it was on those beaches in Normandy in 1944, where brave Americans bravely fought off fascism to defend democracy here at home. So it is today, in 1965 in Selma, that everyday Americans are willing to lay down their lives so that this country can fulfill its purpose and its promise to ourselves and to the rest of the world. And all they ask, members of Congress, is for the right to vote, and you have the power to confer it. That summer, Johnson is able to sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law, creating, for the first time in American history, something truly approaching a real democracy. But that story, their impact and the implications, the inspiration, it doesn't end there. Just 6 years later, imagine this, those of you who are graduating right now. A 26-year-old Sarah Weddington begins her arguments before the United States Supreme Court in the case that we all know now as Roe versus Wade. She's 4 years out of law school. The most complicated case she's handled before is an uncontested divorce. And yet this young Texas woman is able to prevail upon an all-male United States Supreme Court to protect one of the most basic foundational freedoms that we have as human beings. She didn't wait for somebody older or more experienced or more conventionally powerful to do this for her. She took the matter and that power in her own hands. And by winning that decision, extended it to countless Americans for generations to follow. But it is those freedoms, that Sarah Weddington and others won for all of us. It is this very democracy that countless Americans have sacrificed and lost their lives for. It is all of that that is under attack right now. And so the question you might ask yourself is, what can I do about this? And perhaps the better question that we ask of ourselves is, what can all of us do about this? And to answer it, I'll invoke a higher authority from another time in American history. 1858. Think about just how contentious and divided and polarized the country was then. Think about the questions that America was about to ask itself and the answers that would be delivered over the coming Civil War and Reconstruction and its aftermath. Well, in that year, a young attorney, former congressman, running for Senate in a race that he would lose, gives a speech about the nature of power in America. You know, you have the power of the presidency, the legislatures, the courts even. But more powerful than all of that, Abraham Lincoln said, is all of us. In that speech, he says, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. He was talking about our power to politically push those in these high positions to do the right thing at these moments of truth. He anticipated what would be needed for the abolition of slavery, for the civil rights and voting rights leaders that we just talked about. He anticipated all of us at this moment, because I challenge you to find another time in American history where more is on the line for all of us, where the very question of America hangs in the balance. We know those other times. Johnson described them in that speech in 1965. As it was at Lexington and Concord, that courthouse in Appomattox, Normandy, Selma, so it is today with all of us. And I want you to know, and I hope that you feel this, you are the heirs to all that service and sacrifice and struggle that won America through every one of those tests and trials that we've been through before. What you do with this inheritance will define you in the eyes of history and will determine what is possible for this great country. But to this great endowment, you add your own achievement, your own hard work over these last 3 years and over the course of your life, your service, your struggle, your sacrifice, which I believe positions you to lead this country right now, to restore justice and lost freedoms, to uphold the rule of law, and to safely deliver what Lincoln called the last best hope of earth to the generations that will follow yours. History is watching. The world is waiting. So, no pressure, class of 2025, but you cannot be found wanting at this moment of truth. All of us are counting on all of you. But I know that I speak for everyone here, for your parents as well, on this next point. And that is that we believe in you. We know that you can do this. I want you to remember to keep the faith in yourself, in your colleagues, in your classmates. I want you to remember to keep up the fight, to fight on, no matter how hard or how long that fight is going to be. Congratulations to you, class of 2025. Good luck to you and good luck to this country. We cannot wait to see what you do with it. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you very much.